Ever get that feeling where you're just swimming in information, but somehow understanding less, like trying to hold on to smoke?
Yeah, information overload. It's real.
That's exactly the feeling we try to cut through here at the deep dive. We, do the sifting for you, bring you the core stuff.
And today we're jumping into a really fascinating, sometimes tangled web connecting three major thinkers, Nietzsche, Foucault, and Derrida.
Exactly. We've been digging into transcripts covering Nietzsche, genealogy of morality, beyond good and evil, his takes on truth, tragedy, lots there. And then Derrida of grammatology, structure, sign, and play.
And foundational texts.
Right. And Foucault, Madness and Civilization, Order of Things, Punitive Society, Birth of the Clinic. Plus, we even looked at Baudrillard's critique, Forget Foucault.
So a pretty wide range of material. Our mission today, basically, is to unpack their main ideas, see where they, connect or diverge, and why they still matter for thinking about truth, power, knowledge.
Should be some real aha moments, hopefully. Let's dive in with Nietzsche, Genealogy of Morality. He had some issues with how certain English psychologists were tracing morality's history, didn't he?
He really did. The core issue for Nietzsche was their starting assumption. They were kind of looking for the origins of goodness, assuming that was the default.
Right, like good came first.
Exactly. Nietzsche flips that. He says, hang on, you have to be open to the idea that maybe, just maybe, humans aren't inherently good to begin with, that maybe immorality is fundamental. Their bias, he felt, was messing up the whole investigation.
So they're hunting for good, and he's saying maybe look for the roots of, well, something else first. This gets us to his big ideas. Slave morality versus aristocratic morality. How do they come about differently?
The key is the source. Aristocratic morality for Nietzsche comes from within the noble type. They look at themselves, say, I am good, and the bad is just everything that isn't them. Often people lower down the social ladder.
Okay, so it's self-affirming.
Right. Slave morality, though, it grows out of oppression, out of what he called resentment, this kind of simmering resentment. Because they can't assert power directly, the oppressed group flips the noble values.
Ah, so what the masters call good becomes evil.
Precisely. And their own traits, humility, pity, the things born from suffering, those get elevated to good.
So the noble says, I'm good, so you're bad. The slave says, you're evil, so I must be good. That's interesting. But you said it creates potential, yet also makes it harder to challenge power. How so?
Exactly right. That no from the slave coming from powerlessness is totally different from the aristocrats. Yes, it can foster unique values, sure. But that same resentment, that ingrained idea that the master's power is evil or bad, can make them hesitant to actually take power themselves.
Because taking power would mean becoming bad in their own system?
Kind of, yeah. They might lack that self-affirmation needed to seize control, even if they could. It can hinder actually challenging authority effectively.
And this links to his idea that bad wasn't originally like evil, right? Bad came later, maybe tied to things like property.
Yeah, precisely. Nietzsche traces bad back to more practical social distinctions, maybe lacking wealth, status, the traits of the ruling class. Evil, though, that carries a much heavier moral, often a religious weight. He saw evil as a more powerful tool used to instill guilt, enforce obedience, often through, divine judgment.
Which connects to Christianity and the idea of eternal debt. He thought that could hold people back.
Well, yeah. His argument is that if you're eternally indebted, say, for Christ's sacrifice, it can diminish your sense of agency, your autonomy. How can you be truly self-reliant if you always owe this unpayable debt?
So atheism for him lifts that weight.
In a way. By removing that ultimate divine authority, that transcendent point of obligation, Nietzsche felt he could free people up to define their own values without that crushing burden of guilt and gratitude.
Okay. Let's talk perspectivalism. No facts, only interpretations, probably his most famous line. What's the core idea there?
At its heart, it's a rejection of any single objective God's eye view of the world. He's saying all knowledge, all understanding is filtered through our particular viewpoint, our lens.
So objectivity isn't about being neutral.
Not for Nietzsche. It's more about gathering multiple perspectives, seeing through various eyes, as he put it. None is inherently truer, but seen from many angles gives a fuller picture. Think about, different news reports of the same event.
Yeah, totally different takes. And this applies even to asceticism and science. He wasn't totally against self-denial, but wary if it's imposed, and critical of science.
You got it. He saw asceticism, like self-denial, could sometimes be a tool for regaining control in tough situations. But when it becomes a societal demand forced on people, that's problematic. It leads to this kind of internal policing.
Like Foucault's panopticon idea.
Exactly. That's a striking parallel he draws self-surveillance.
Yeah.
And science. He doubted scientists were truly free spirits because they still fundamentally believed in finding the truth, which he questioned. He even preferred the Old Testament to the New sometimes, found it less sanitized.
Wow, okay. And he said humans are both free and unfree, rejecting simple binaries. This connects to the will to power. What is that exactly?
He saw completely free or completely determined as too simple. The will to power isn't just about dominating others, though. It's more fundamental. A drive for growth, overcoming self-mastery, expanding one's capabilities.
So it's the force behind our actions and interpretations.
That's how Nietzsche saw it, yeah. It's what pushes us, what conditions things, and what lets us potentially move beyond traditional thinking, even beyond God.
And that connects to his critique of false freedom, like in Platonism, where philosophers are the guides.
Right. He was critical of systems like Plato's that posit some ideal realm. They might promise freedom through understanding these ideals, but they often make you dependent on the philosopher, the supposed guide.
So you're still submitting to their standard, not creating your own.
Exactly. It's an imposed freedom, in a sense, not genuine self-overcoming driven by your own will to power.
Okay, let's shift to on truth and lying in a non-moral sense and the birth of tragedy. He questions truth even more deeply here, saying correct perception is impossible. Why?
His argument is that a perfect match, like a full and adequate expression of an object in our subjective mind, just can't happen. The object out there and our subjective experience are fundamentally different spheres, different languages almost.
So trying to translate is always flawed.
Always. He calls it more an aesthetic way of relating, like a stammering translation. We never grasp the thing in itself, only our interpretation or translation of it.
And we wear these glasses of correct perception based on the empirical world, but that doesn't show us the essence. And repeated experiences become mistaken for truth.
Precisely. Our everyday experience shapes what seems correct, but it's still surface level. And yeah, when a particular sensory input gets paired with a mental image over and over, maybe even inherited culturally, that arbitrary link can start to feel like a necessary objective truth.
Like that dream analogy he uses.
Yeah, the repeated dream eventually feels real. It's fascinating. It echoes some modern ideas like Judith Butler on gender performance, where repeated acts solidify into perceived reality.
He contrasts the man of reason, science, with the man of intuition, senses, saying the intuitive one suffers more. Then in Birth of Tragedy, tragedy connects us beyond the personal.
Right. The man of reason seeks logical understanding. The man of intuition trusts instinct and senses. Nietzsche felt the intuitive one, being open to the whole messy range of experience, including pain, inevitably suffers more in that internal conflict. And yes, tragedy for him wasn't just personal drama. It plunged you beneath the ego, connecting you to this primal heart of nature.
Giving a kind of knowledge that's unsettling.
Unsettling, exactly. Not necessarily knowledge that tells you what to do, but a deeper awareness of existence.
He talked about German music having this purifying role, like Greek tragedy working with myth. Makes you wonder about music today.
He definitely saw German music, especially Wagner at the time, as having this potential for catharsis, for healing, similar to tragedy for the Greeks.
Yeah.
Music and myth together could ground a community, help them face the tragic. Whether contemporary music does that?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a big question, isn't it?
Yeah. And the Apollonian and Dionysian order and chaos are key to all art, with the sublime and comical borrowing from each other, and gesture and music are instinctual expressions.
Absolutely central to Birth of Tragedy. Art arises from that tension. Apollo representing form, order, dream, Dionysus representing intoxication, chaos, instinct. He saw things like the sublime, often linked to Dionysian order, and the comical, more Apollonian distance form as drawing strength from each other. And yes, things like physical gesture, he linked it to Apollo, structured symbols and musical tone, more Dionysian, visceral feeling, he saw those as really primal, pre-conscious ways we express emotion.
Lastly, on Nietzsche, that distinction between a beautiful painting, meeting expectations, and a good one, capturing the essence of painting itself, and the free spirit breaking from tradition ties it all together.
Right. Beautiful might just mean it looks like what we think a painting should look like, maybe a pretty subject. Good, for Nietzsche, goes deeper. Does it truly engage with the potential of the art form? And yeah, the free spirit is the recurring ideal. the one who questions everything, breaks molds, rejects imposed values that resonates through all his critiques of morality, truth, and tradition. It's about forging your own path.
Okay, fascinating stuff. Let's pivot now to Jacques Derrida, deconstruction. He starts by tackling Saussure's signifier-signified model, arguing the signified itself is a kind of writing. That's a big concept.
It is, yeah, it's pretty radical. So Shore gave a signifier the word, say tree, and signified the concept or image of a tree in your mind. Derrida comes along and says, hold on, that mental image, the signified, it's not some pure, stable thing outside of language.
It's also constructed.
Exactly. It's constructed by language, by culture, by other signs. So it's not a grounding reality. It's part of the same system of writing or textuality. It doesn't escape the sign system.
He uses the tree example well. My idea of tree is different from yours, right? It's an abstraction.
Precisely. Your mental tree might be an oak, mine a pine. It's a generalized, homogenized image, different for everyone.
Yeah.
So the word tree isn't pointing to some universal real treeness out there, but to another abstraction in our heads, which is itself built from signs.
And this whole idea of a real world under an artificial one, based on binaries like inside-outside, signified-signifier. Derrida sees that as a long-running philosophical habit.
Very much so. He argues much of Western thought relies on this idea, a deep, true reality, hidden beneath the surface of language or culture. This fuels the search for origins, for foundations, usually setting up these pairs where one side is seen as more real or primary. Worldly, non-worldly, speech writing, presence absence.
He even applies this to Levi-Strauss's view of nomadic societies versus states with writing, saying that distinction keeps the binary logic, logocentrism, going.
Yeah, he critiques Levi-Strauss for potentially reinforcing that binary. Portraying oral societies as fundamentally opposite to literate, state societies can inadvertently privilege speech over writing, which Derrida sees as key to logocentrism, the centering of meaning in a primal word or presence.
So writing isn't just tacked on later.
Derrida suggests it's more intertwined. Writing, or at least the structure and logic associated with it, might already be implicit in spoken language itself.
And Rousseau had that mixed view writing as dead, but also a tool for control.
Right. Derrida points out Rousseau's ambiguity. Sometimes Rousseau contrasts the living voice with dead writing, but he also sees writing's value for analysis and comparison. And yeah, the worry about writing as a tool for control pops up there too, shared by others. It shows how complex our relationship with these forms is.
Okay, let's get to the core. Deconstruction itself. On one level, it's about showing binaries aren't so neat, they overlap. Like the urban jungle example.
That's the starting point, yeah. Deconstruction examines these oppositions we rely on: nature, culture, man, woman, reason, emotion. It shows the boundaries are blurry, the terms bleed into each other. Urban jungle is a simple illustration of how we can superimpose seemingly opposite categories.
But it goes deeper. It's about how the terms depend on each other. No fixed center.
Absolutely, that's the crucial step. Light only makes sense because of dark. Good needs evil. Neither term in a binary pair can exist or have meaning on its own. They define each other. This completely destabilizes the idea that one term is the foundation or the center.
Meaning is always shifting.
Always deferred, always relational. There's no fixed point, no ultimate grounding truth outside the play of differences.
He even uses the incest taboo to question nature culture. Does the taboo bridge the gap, or does it create the gap? He's skeptical if you just say the binary isn't real from the outset.
Right. It's a clever move. Does this seemingly universal taboo existing across nature and culture link them? Or does its very existence rely on maintaining the distinction, allowing us to even think in terms of nature versus culture? He doesn't want to just erase the binary. He wants to show how it functions, how it's constructed, even by things that seem to cross it.
And the bricoleur versus the engineer idea from Levi-Strauss, Derrida says even the engineer is a kind of bricoleur.
Yeah, Levi-Strauss contrasts the bricoleur, who tinkers with whatever's available, with the engineer, who designs from scratch. Derrida points out that the engineer also works within existing systems, language, materials, scientific knowledge. They aren't creating from nothing.
So the engineer's outside status is a bit of a myth.
Kind of, yeah. It gives them this mythic quality of being beyond immediate constraints.
Yeah.
But they're still playing within a pre-existing structure, still bricolage at some level.
And this all ties back to critiquing logocentrism, the focus on the word, speech over writing.
Exactly. Deconstruction is a major tool for dismantling that logocentric tradition, which has historically privileged speech, presence, and the idea of a singular originating truth, often the word of God. Derrida challenges that hierarchy and the whole reliance on binary thinking to structure reality.
Okay, let's move to Michel Foucault. Hugely influential. His work explores how power shapes people, shapes understanding, really sets the stage for post-structuralism. Madness in civilization is a key starting point. What's the gist there?
Foucault looks at how we've understood and treated madness over time. Back in the Middle Ages, you had the exclusion of lepers. Later, interestingly, the Gothic architectural style, once about order, gets linked to the irrationality of madness.
So art and architecture reflected the view of madness.
Yeah, madness itself starts being depicted as indeterminate, self-referential, chaotic mirroring, that shift in aesthetics.
He also mentions dreams as a space free from rigid forms, and the weird position of the mad in the 15th century, visible but confined.
Right. Dreams offered a kind of liberation from rational constraints, meaning it was fluid. And yeah, the 15th century saw the mad becoming both present in society yet increasingly separated, sometimes put on display in places like the Hospital General, becoming objects of curiosity, a strained, in-between state.
Then came the judicial gaze madness as animalistic, leading to brutal treatments.
That was a crucial shift. Madness started being judged against a standard of reason, equated with losing humanity, becoming animal-like. This justified treatments aimed at breaking that animality, reflecting a broader view of nature itself as orderly and logical. Madness was seen as a violation of that natural order.
And unreason wasn't seen as a natural illness, but a label for human degradation, which led to medical categories like melancholia and mania.
Exactly. In the classical age, unreason wasn't primarily a medical condition. It marked the boundary of reason, a falling away from humanity. But as life got more complex, medicine stepped in, creating categories like melancholia or mania, initially linked to animal spirits, later nerves trying to classify and explain these states, leading eventually to things like hysteria, hypochondria.
Moving to the punitive society, power shifts from big public displays to being woven into society, morality, even theater.
Yes, Foucault traces power moving from, say, public execution's overt force to more subtle forms embedded in everyday life. Moral codes, social norms, institutions. Discipline becomes internalized. And even things like theatrical performances in asylums became part of managing the mad, playing into their delirium sometimes.
He introduces governmentality here too, not just top-down power, but getting citizens involved in control mechanisms.
Right. Governmentality is about managing populations, shaping conduct, not just through laws, but through knowledge, practices, institutions that encourage people to regulate themselves and others. Getting citizens involved in policing, administration, public health. It's a strategic, dispersed form of power.
Different from, say, fascism's concentrated power.
Very different. Governmentality works through the social body, whereas those other forms are more about direct imposition from a central point.
And power and knowledge get tangled in the disciplinary society. Management knowledge, police knowledge, statistics, all linking people to production. And confinement replaces execution, silencing dissent.
Absolutely. They become inseparable. New forms of knowledge about managing workers, policing populations, measuring people with statistics create new ways to exert power, often aimed at making individuals productive and docile. Prisons and asylums replace the scaffold, aiming to correct individuals, integrate them, but also effectively remove disruptive voices from circulation, filtering them through institutional authority.
Okay, the birth of the clinic. The medical gaze turns inward, focuses on the invisible. Disease becomes a thing to study, and this needs the entry of death into medicine.
That's the core argument. The medical perspective shifts radically. Instead of just observing surface symptoms, the gaze penetrates the body, mainly through autopsy. Death becomes the key that unlocks the invisible secrets of disease.
So seeing inside the dead body reveals the truth about disease in the living.
Essentially, yes. Disease transforms from just a collection of symptoms into a tangible, localizable process within the body's tissues and organs. It becomes a positive object of knowledge, revealed by death.
He outlines stages. Medicine getting tied to social structures, anomalies becoming sources of knowledge, shifting from classifying diseases to understanding the individual patient.
Correct. First, medicine gets integrated into state and social administration. Second, deviations, the abnormal, become crucial for understanding the normal workings of the body. Third, the focus moves from slotting symptoms into predefined disease categories towards understanding the specific pathology within the individual patient.
And new tools emerge. Statistics, series and groups, analogy, specialized language, esotericism of the visible. And the gaze becomes an informed glance.
Exactly. Statistical thinking helps establish norms. Analogy helps map relationships between different conditions. A new technical language develops to precisely describe the newly visible internal phenomena. And the general observation, the gaze, evolves into the clinician's glance, a look informed by this growing body of knowledge, making deductions, interpreting signs within the institutional context of the clinic.
The clinic balances speech and spectacle, aiming for coherent discourse.
Right. It becomes a space where what the patient says, speech, is integrated with what the doctor sees, spectacle, structured by medical knowledge, aiming for a consistent narrative of the illness.
And death is both the hidden truth and the visible secret. And fevers shift from signs of signs to localized tissue reactions.
Yes, death is the ultimate invisible truth that disease points towards. But it's also made visible through autopsy. And his brief mention of fevers illustrates the broader shift. Away from interpreting complex patterns of general symptoms, signs, towards identifying specific, localized changes in tissues, the anatomo-clinical approach. It's the end of seeing diseases as fixed entities, focusing instead on local processes.
Then in that interview on the archaeology of knowledge, he clarifies his method wasn't pre-planned but emerged, and introduces the statement and its materiality.
Yeah, he presents archaeology not as the method he always used, but as a way to understand the ground revealed by his earlier historical work. The statement is key. It's not just words, but an event, existing in a specific context, having real effects. It has materiality, unlike abstract ideas.
He stresses discontinuity in history, not smooth progress, and discursive formations rules governing what's sayable in a field influenced by power.
Right. Archaeology looks for ruptures, shifts, not neat evolution. Discursive formations are those underlying rules defining a field like medicine or economics. They determine what counts as a valid statement, who can speak authoritatively. And power relations are crucial in deciding who gets to participate, whose knowledge counts. Think of Western medicine versus indigenous healing, for example.
And the episteme is the bigger picture, the total set of relations connecting discourses in an era, like a historical a priori. Does he think everything is discourse?
The episteme is the overarching configuration of knowledge in a period. It's the condition of possibility for the various discourses and sciences, shaping what can be thought or said as true. It functions like a historical a priori. As for whether everything is discourse, Foucault hinted at a possible pre-discursive reality, things existing outside language. But crucially, he argued we can only know or access phenomena, like madness, through discourse. Our knowledge is always mediated by these historical frameworks.
Okay. Deep stuff. Finally, let's bring in Baudrillard's critique in Forget Foucault. Baudrillard thinks Foucault missed the boat on simulation, that he was still stuck in older ideas of power.
That's Baudrillard's core argument, yeah. He respected Foucault, but felt his analysis of power, however brilliant, didn't grasp the shift into an era where simulation or science detached from reality become dominant. Foucault was still analyzing power as if it had a real locus and effect, whereas Baudrillard saw power itself becoming a simulation.
Baudrillard was even suspicious of a, quote, supposedly summarizing his view, but it captured his point about sexual simulation.
Right, he found a specific quote almost too perfect, which made him suspicious. But it reflected his argument that Foucault couldn't account for how sex, for example, becomes detached from biology or desire, circulating as pure sign, pure simulation. He felt Foucault was still implicitly working with an idea of sexuality that had already dissolved.
He also saw Foucault's critique of repression as a trap, swapping negative power for a positive, pervasive one, maybe making desire just another form of power.
Yeah, Baudrillard suggests Foucault replaces power represses with power produces, making it immanent everywhere, much like desire in Deleuze. Baudrillard then asks, well, isn't this desire just another name for this all-pervasive productive power? Is it really a liberation?
And Baudrillard argues repression and the unconscious are obsolete now. Seduction, being reversible, is stronger than power. And Foucault saw power as illusions, but missed the illusion of power, the simulacrum.
For Baudrillard, in our hyperreal simulated world, concepts like repression don't hold. Seduction, playful, reversible, based on signs, becomes more potent than power, which needs stability and irreversibility. So Foucault unmasked how power works, its mechanisms, its illusions. But Baudrillard says he missed the bigger picture. That power itself might now be the illusion, a simulation with no real substance or location.
And this leads Baudrillard to question revolution. Events are just late effects. And the redoubled simulation sign means power has no center, no one even wants it.
Exactly. If reality is simulated, can there be real revolution? Events might just be echoes, effects without causes. The redoubled simulation sign points to this emptiness, where reality affects just duplicate events uselessly. power dissolves, becomes diffused, and crucially for Baudrillard, the actual desire for power evaporates too. It becomes an empty game.
Wow. Okay, so that was quite the journey, a real deep dive into Nietzsche, Derrida, Foucault, with Baudrillard's challenge thrown in.
It certainly was. We covered Nietzsche's radical questioning of morality, truth, emphasizing perspective, the will to power.
Derrida's deconstruction, showing the instability beneath meaning, questioning those binary structures we rely on.
Foucault's meticulous mapping of how power and knowledge intertwine historically to shape us and our institutions.
And Baudrillard stepping in to say, maybe even that analysis is outdated in the age of the simulacrum.
Absolutely. Grasping these ideas, even the basics, gives you, the listener, some really powerful lenses for looking critically at the world.
Yeah, at the information you get, the systems you're in. So maybe a final thought to leave you with. How could these concepts, perspective, deconstruction, power knowledge, apply to your daily life? The news you read, the social media feeds, maybe even your own core beliefs.
What assumptions are embedded there that might be worth, questioning? It's definitely something to think about. We'd encourage you to dig deeper into their actual writings, too. If this sparked your interest, there's always more layer.